Hello there chaps, welcome back. Today I'm throwing in an additional video for you. Not part of my weekly catch-up, this is just an injection of inspiration because I'm a student of history. I'm a firm believer in looking to the past to certainly guide you and direct you to the future. And sometimes when I need a bit of a boost, I need a kick up the backside, I like to look at what people have done in the past because it really helps me get my groove on for the future. And today is a day which I've been thinking about doing this for a little while, because today, the 16th of August, is an important day. It is a day where a significant individual act was undertaken by a gentleman during the Second World War, and it marked a unique occasion. And let me tell you about the story of Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson. Now, he is an RAF hero, and as you know, I served in the RAF myself, albeit as a humble airman, and my job was refueling aircraft, but we interacted with the pilots, and they're a special breed of people, certainly highly skilled, highly intelligent. And James Nicholson was of that ilk, although thrown back to the 1940s. Now, he was a chap who joined the RAF volunteer reserve prior to the Second World War. He had a profound interest in aviation, and he is what you would probably describe as not your sort of typical toffee-nosed, tally-ho RAF fighter pilot. He's more of an intelligent lad who's done well. He joined the RAF, trained as a fighter pilot, and he flip-flammed around the place flying in Spitfires. But 1944, we find him flying a Hurricane fighter. The Hurricane, in my opinion, doesn't get as much of the historical attention as it's deserved, because the Spitfire hogs all the glory as this sort of elite aircraft of that period. But the Hurricanes were far more numerous and actually did a lot of the heavy lifting for the RAF throughout the course of the war. Now, in 1940, James Nicholson was a fully trained RAF fighter pilot. He'd flown the Spitfire, but at this point he had joined 249 Squadron of the RAF flying Hurricanes. Now, 249 Squadron is synonymous in so much as it ended the war as the highest scoring squadron in the Royal Air Force. So it's a squadron which is chock full of tough, hardened, heroic fighters. And James Nicholson was relatively new to the squadron, having recently converted over, and he went on his first fighting patrol. Now, this is during the Battle of Britain. The Battle of Britain was a pivotal period for the United Kingdom. If you imagine, all of the great standing armies of Europe had fallen. France was considered to be, one of the most powerful military nations in the world. They had fallen like dominoes before Nazi Germany. And all of the other big countries in Europe, the Netherlands, Belgium, Norway, they'd all gone.
Stunned by the sudden thrust of the Nazi drive into the North countries, troops rallied around loyal officers to defend their homeland. This scene was repeated in hundreds of Norwegian villages, even as the enemy moved in for the kill.
We are shocked by the almost incredible eyewitness stories that come to us. Stories of what is happening at this moment to the civilian population of Norway. My friend and colleague, Mr. Winston Churchill.
Yes, to sign the most humiliating armistice in the history of France, as wave after wave of bombers pounded the city into a raging inferno. During waited for his finest hour, and slowly died amid the flaming wreckage and the undaunted explosive savage air-pounding of the war. Bracing themselves against Hitler's savage bombing attacks, receiving victims.
They'd all been steamrollered by the Blitzkrieg, and the Nazi menace lay on just 20 miles away on the other side of the English Channel. Now, of course, it was necessary for the German forces to gain air superiority before launching their planned invasion, I think it was called Operation Sea Lion, of the United Kingdom. Of course, it was their intention to take the UK. You can't truly accept mastery of Europe unless the United Kingdom has fallen. And it was Hitler's intention to cross the Channel and defeat this country. And he would have been in a good place to do so. because the British Expeditionary Force, our army, had travelled to Europe. It had been essentially soundly thrashed by the Nazi forces, and they'd had to scurry back across the Channel in what's called, you know, the Miracle of Dunkirk. About 350,000 soldiers were able to escape, but in so doing, they left all of their weapons of war behind on the beaches of France. You know, all the tanks, all the guns, all their transport, pretty much even the small arms were left behind. So the army, which was able to scurry back to the UK, were denuded of their ability to fight. Their weapons were left behind. So this is the position we find ourselves in July to October 1940, during the period which has now been called in history the Battle of Britain. German forces under the generalship, if you want to call it that, of Hermann Göring, Reichsführer Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe. It was their task to obtain aerial superiority over the sea, or over the UK, so that their landing craft could safely get across the Channel. Of course, it would be massacre if they attempted to do so whilst not having air superiority, because the Royal Air Force, one of the larger, more advanced air forces in the world, would have made mincemeat of them. So as a result of that, the Luftwaffe were sending forces over on a daily basis, incursions into the UK, attacking initially air bases to destroy the Royal Air Force's ability to launch aircraft to defeat their fighters in the air and their bombers, but at a later point they started attacking the cities themselves in sort of attacks of terror on the civilian population. Now, at this point, and we are talking about August 1940, the Battle of Britain was in its full swing. It lasted until about early October 1940, a period of about 3 to 4 months, where this constant daily battle of attrition went on. German fighters and bombers would cross the Channel, incursions into British airspace, and the Royal Air Force would send Hurricanes and Spitfires to meet them in aerial combat. Dogfights, life and death battles going on daily up there in the sky. The average age of the fighter pilots flying for the Royal Air Force was 19 years of age. They'd had as little as 10 hours of tuition on their aircraft before taking their first solo flights. They were being rushed through. The Royal Air Force was not just full of British people, it was bolstered by people from the whole British Empire. And not just the Empire, peoples of free countries whose nations had already fallen to the Nazis, who'd fled to the UK in exile and had joined the RAF, and even countries like the USA, who were still a couple of years away from joining the fight, but their citizens, realising what was coming, many had crossed the border into Canada and enlisted into the military and found themselves fighting in the Battle of Britain. This hinge moment in world history. For surely, if the UK had fallen, the world would have a different outlook today, for sure. It would have been a totally different outcome to the Second World War. I'm absolutely certain of that. So this aerial battle that was taking place each and every day over this 4 months was pivotal in the history of the world, and it was left to our young fellows, 19-year-olds, some of them. But James Nicholson was a little bit older than that. He was in his early 20s at this point, had a bit of experience. He was a flight lieutenant, but not a lot of combat experience. So I'm just going to read for you the citation which he received for a particular medal which made him unique in every way. The medal I'm talking about is the Victoria Cross. And James Nicholson was the only fighter pilot during the Battle of Britain, or pilot of any kind during the Battle of Britain, to be awarded the Victoria Cross. In fact, he was the only RAF member of fighter command during the whole of the Second World War to receive the Victoria Cross. Now, some will say this is because the Victoria Cross generally has to be observed. The actions of the winner has to be observed by others so that they can nominate that person for the Victoria Cross. But obviously fighter pilots tend to be involved in man-to-man combat, so often their actions, their deeds go unseen. But James Nicholson's actions were identified, and this is the citation for his Victoria Cross. During an engagement with the enemy near Southampton on the 16th of August 1940, Flight Lieutenant Nicholson's aircraft was hit by 4 cannon shells, 2 of which wounded him, while another set fire to the gravity fuel tank of his Hurricane. When about to abandon his aircraft, owing to flames in the cockpit, he sighted an enemy fighter. This he attacked and shot down, although as a result of staying with his burning aircraft, he sustained serious burns to his hands, face, neck and legs. Flight Lieutenant Nicholson has always displayed great enthusiasm for air fighting, and this incident shows that he possesses courage and determination of a high order. By continuing to engage the enemy after he had been wounded and his aircraft set on fire, he displayed exceptional gallantry and disregard for the safety of his own life. Now this, to a degree, downplays the situation. We know from his words, because Nicholson obviously survived this situation, that he was in his aircraft about to abandon. He'd been hit by these cannon shells. Cannon shells, incidentally, are rounds or bullets which are enormous in stature. They're often used to destroy enemy tanks. But his aircraft was hit by 4 cannon shells and he was quite seriously injured, wounded in his arm, his leg, his head. He was pretty badly shot up. His fuel tank was alight. He realised his aircraft was done for, it wasn't going to make it to the ground. He threw open his cockpit and he was about to jump out. However, he realised that his aircraft was fast approaching in its death dive a German Messerschmitt fighter. He realised this was his chance to lessen the impact of that aircraft on his fellow fighters. He sat back down in the aircraft, right? He returned to the aircraft, he put the aircraft in a power dive towards the enemy and just laid open with the machine guns, destroying the aircraft, which later went on to crash. In so doing, he sustained hideous burns. He said he realised it was time to get out. When his hand on the machine gun firing mechanism, he could see the bones of his hand through the flesh. So he then jumped out. His hand had, been burned into a claw effect as the muscle had been burned away. He jumped out of the aircraft, and as he was sailing down to earth on his parachute to add ignominy to his situation, he was fired upon by an overzealous member of the Home Guard who shot him in the backside as he sailed down. Now when he landed, he was in a horrific state and they didn't expect him to survive 24 hours. He was pretty badly banged up. However, he did survive and his burns returned to full health to a degree that he was able to return to air fighting. Now, he received the Victoria Cross from the King in Buckingham Palace and became something of a national hero as a consequence. He had done enough, right? This was the perception, he had done enough. He could have gone on to instructing duties. You know, the Victoria Cross is the highest award for gallantry at that point given to any nation in the British Empire. And they were awarded in very few numbers, particularly in the Second World War. Very few numbers. So he had done his part. But he wasn't that sort of guy. He decided that he had to live up to this heroic image which his medal had vested upon him. So he went back into combat. In fact, he went to Burma, Southeast Asia campaign, where the British were fighting the Japanese. And he went back into the air as a squadron leader, flying a Bristol Beaufighter, and was involved in combat operations, and believe it or not, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is a level 3 award. So with the Victoria Cross being the highest, the next level down being the Distinguished Service Order at that point, and then he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. So he had been awarded 2 of his nation's highest awards, but still flying in operations. In fact, tragically, almost at the very end of the war, as a wing commander by this point, he'd been elevated in rank, he was 28 years of age, he went on as an observer on a mission in an RAF, I think it was a B-24 Liberator bomber. The aircraft got into difficulty and it crashed into the sea, the Bay of Bengal, and his body was never recovered. He was lost at sea in that accident. And tragically, his wife was made aware of his death on VE Day, Victory of Europe Day, on the very day that the war was declared at an end in Europe. his widow was made aware of his death. And that is the tragic story of the only Battle of Britain pilot and the only member of Fighter Command to have won the Victoria Cross, and he won it today, 84 years ago. Look up into the sky and imagine that Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson was up there fighting for the freedom of the world, and he won his Victoria Cross on this day. So something to think about today and to inspire you. Perhaps when you're thinking of giving up and you realise that perhaps you're all done in, is there a chance that you could slip back down into the cockpit and make a difference, even though there's fire raging all around you and you have to make enormous sacrifice to get the job done? It is possible, and James Nicholson proved it to us. There you go, chaps. Something for you to think about today. I'll see you very soon.